Jai Hind, everybody. Besides today being Thursday series of lectures, I consider today a special day because we are really fortunate that someone from amongst us is going to speak on a very, very important subject. Since the time we have started this Thursday lecture series, we have had only the external speakers, but the strength of a think tank will be really known once more and more scholars and researchers or those who are posted here start speaking not only from the platform of CENJOWS but also the elsewhere. The subject today which is going to be covered is also going to be very, very important, and it is interesting the whole world. All those of you who would be monitoring the geopolitical development, especially the rush of the leading world powers towards Arctic Sea, will realize its importance and also what interests India to look at Arctic Sea seriously. We couldn't have found a better speaker than Captain Dr. Nitin Agarwala, who is a serving naval officer, to speak to us on this important subject. You are already well aware about his credentials. However, it will be interesting for you all to know that he has a wide-ranging experience related to a warship in multifaceted domain to include as a user, designer, inspector, maintainer, and a policymaker. Besides, he has been a teacher on these and related subjects to number of establishments and to number of recipients, and a researcher, of course. He has authored more than 80 articles in various publications, and all these are reputed articles. Besides, he has also penned down two important books. One is Deep Seabed Mining in the Indian Ocean, Economic and Strategic Dimensions. And second is Rise of China as a world leader in commercial shipbuilding. In fact, he was the one who steered the roundtable discussion on shipbuilding, which we hosted in Kota House a few months back. His research interests include corrosion, shipbuilding, deep seabed natural resources, submarine cables, blue economy, artificial intelligence, marine pollution, climate change, blue economy, maritime technological issues, and anything linked to these issues. And he was the one who pioneered the detailed research on a project allocated to us by Headquarter Ideas, basically understanding and giving out the implications of China's exploitation of South China Sea islands. He has already had a experience as a research fellow at National Maritime Foundation from 2017 to 19, and currently he is a senior fellow with us. Of course, he is also a visiting faculty at Naval War College, Goa, and the Center for Maritime Studies at University of Mumbai. So, let's hear him in detail, because this subject will also emerge, or I will say has already emerged as one of the main national concerns for India, and more research and work will be needed by our think tank in this particular domain in due course of time. With that background, I now invite Captain Dr. Nitin Agarwala to commence his talk on India's evolving engagements in Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind words. Allow me to begin the talk of mine by sharing my presentation with all. Like the Director General mentioned, Arctic has become an important area of concern for the entire world. And what has happened in the bargain is that it has drawn attention of many nations, both emerging powers and resident powers. Keeping that in mind, I thought maybe we need to look at how and where India stands and what India's evolving engagement in the Arctic has been. So to cover up that aspect, I have broken down the entire discussion of my presentation in the headings as in front of you, give you a brief introduction about what the Arctic is all about and which players are playing there, the interests of other nations, strategic importance of the Arctic, India's interests in particular, India's growing engagements in that region, recommendations of some nature for India, and definitely then a small conclusion with respect to it. If we look at the Arctic Circle is defined as an imaginary line that circles the Earth at 66 degrees 33 minutes north. If you look at the figure in front of you, this is basically a snapshot of the Earth from the top. So effectively, if you can see, it has got countries such as Canada, you have Greenland, Denmark, which kind of represents both Greenland and the Faroes Island. Then you have Iceland, you have Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, and America represented in terms of Alaska being there. So these are the countries which have these are the nations which are bordering the Arctic Circle, or the Arctic as we call it as. Why Arctic has gained importance over the years is mainly because of the reduction of ice cap courtesy the climate change. If you look at pictures, you will see that 1980 there was a major cover of ice and it could not be kind of moved around. Subsequently, with climate change increasing over the years, the figures in front of you indicate very clearly how the ice cap has been reducing in this region. And it is expected by 2050, there will be completely reduction of the ice cover, and possibly you would have no ice at all in that particular region. How true? Very difficult to predict, but yes, these are basic predictions which have been given. Now, what it finally evolves or boils down to is that you would have conditions wherein the areas which were not available for carrying out shipping trade or having ships moving in that area because of the ice would be open for movement of maritime trade. Effectively, some trade routes which have been defined is the Northern Sea Route, which is also called as the NSR. It is the dashed line which is shown in front of you. The other is the Northeast Passage, which is the hard line. And then the third one is the Northwest Passage. These are with respect to the areas of access and depending on which coast region you want to take it as. Now, what happens in the bargain is that the NSR, which is supposed to be there, is considered an important route, because finally, at the end of it, if you are moving from the eastern side of Asia to any part of Europe, especially the western part of Europe, then the time taken for maritime trade is very high. The table in front of you gives you a kind of a comparative distance in terms of if one was supposed to move from Yokohama in Japan, Hong Kong or Singapore to Hamburg, which is a port in Germany. So if you were to take the NSR, you would end up with about 6,920 kilometers if you were to move from Yokohama. And if the same trade is to be done from Yokohama to Hamburg through Suez Canal, it is close to about 11,000 kilometers. Cape of Good Hope, close to about 14,500 kilometers. Panama Canal, close to about 12,420 kilometers. What it effectively means is that there will be a lot of saving in terms of time and in bunker. Bunker, basically the oil cost which is involved, and definitely for climate change, from the positive side of the climate change, close to about 6 to 35% of carbon dioxide emission reduction as compared to if one was to move from the Suez Canal route. Now, what is the interest of that area, of this region, is what is of concern to us. So let's look at the interest areas. Those interest areas are in terms of oil and gas resources, which today are not accessible because of the cold temperature. It is not possible to drill. And as the temperature increases, as the area increases, this area will be accessible for oil and gas resources. Similarly is for mineral resources. Mineral resources are load of mineral resources are available, and especially with growing involvement or growing requirement of these minerals with respect to technology and technological areas, these mineral resources are of importance. These are both deep seabed minerals and land minerals. Then you have another area of interest is the biodiversity. There are a number of organisms, the marine organisms that are prevalent in that area, which are required to be studied. They are still not accessible because of the ice cap, but once this ice cap reduces, automatically this biodiversity would be accessible, and that is what would be of interest and of concern for the scientific community. Then you have got something called as biogeochemistry. Biogeochemistry allows you to understand how climate change happens, how monsoons occur, and things like that. And it is important to kind of study it, and has a repercussion on the entire rain pattern of the world. So effectively, that is another area of interest for the people. Then there are marine species. Since there is a lot of ice cover, a major population of the marine species has still not been established. If you see the slide in front of you, you would see that the red dots are the areas which are unestablished in terms of the marine species is there. The yellow one, we are still unknown. We know that these species exist, but it is unknown. And the F is the field. That means you have very little understanding, or literally no understanding with respect to what is available in that region. So effectively, it is the marine species which are important. And don't forget that marine food or the seafood is a very important source of vitamins and proteins as far as the world population, especially the poor population, is concerned. This all has led to establishing of a number of research stations in the Arctic. Initially, these research stations were focused towards military or intelligence posts that were created during the Cold War. Subsequently, they have been these research stations evolved for environmental studies, other scientific studies, and specific projects in that particular area. Many of these research stations have either evolved or they have closed down after the specific project has been completed. Let's look at strategic importance of the Arctic from the viewpoint of some two specific countries, that is China and Russia. If you look at it from the point of view of China, the main interest is trade. And that evolves from the fact that if the ships were to move from Dalian to Rotterdam, then the passage, if they were to take from the NSR, would be 35 days. And if they were to take Suez Canal, they will clock close to about 48 days. Close to about 12 days or 13 days of saving is a very large saving in terms of the time which is required for the trade. So it has a great importance for China. From China's viewpoint, Malacca dilemma is also a very, very important area of concern, because there is a thought process with China that if Malacca is closed for them, how do they carry out trade? So if they have the NSR open to their convenience, then definitely it is a matter of interest for them, and that is why they have been focusing on it. Now, from the viewpoint of Russia, if you see Russia's main maritime boundary is in the Arctic, a very long maritime boundary. They have a number of ports there, which are not all the around the air ports. They are specific. They are open, available only in certain seasons when there is a certain amount of melting of ice, and then only these ports are available, and that also are operated with icebreakers. Now, if the NSR opens, or if the Arctic ice melts, definitely these ports will develop. Why? Because there will be trading. There will be people who would be coming in to use this route, and definitely they will be able to gain more in terms of economy, in terms of their development and things like that. Plus, this area today is a frozen area. Even the landmass is frozen. So if this landmass kind of thaws down, definitely the resources which are there, which I spoke of in the initial slides, will be accessible, and it will create greater economic growth for this region. So it becomes important for Russia. And if you look at an example in terms of the Yamal LNG gas terminal, which is in the northern part of Russia, if you were to transship from there the LNG exports, then you would find that there is a long route which they have to take from somewhere here into the winter. They cannot move on this side. Now, if in the summers, because of limited access of the maritime route, they are able to move here. Now, if this Arctic ice is not there, you would definitely have easier access and easier movement of the LNG from Yamal port to the eastern part of Asia, which is a major chunk or major part that consumes LNG as on date. The other areas of interest as far as Russia is concerned in terms of hydrocarbons, it is expected close to about 50 million tons of export of hydrocarbons would be possible by 2030. Dry bulk and project cargo would also increase to about 5 million tons. Currently, nickel is about 1.1 million tons per year. Iron ore from Scandinavia can move. Deliveries to Arctic communities will also be possible. And container cargo is something which will be added onto this complete scenario. Presently, there is very limited container cargo movement because there is very limited maritime trade as of date, which is happening in that particular region. But as the ice melts, as the NSR opens, the container cargo will only pick up, and definitely there will be more of movement. And it is expected it will be close to about 15 million TEU, which is quite a large number. From India's point of interest, if we look at the involvement of India as far as the polls is concerned, our initial involvement was as early as 1920 when we were part of the British Empire, and we signed the Svalbard Treaty. Now, this treaty was mainly as a kind of an observer as part of the British Empire itself, and it gave us rights to the natural resources there. And the Svalbard Treaty says that there is taxation is limited to only governance as far as that area is concerned. And this treaty does not demilitarize the region. Please note that it does not demilitarize the region. It allows military to be positioned by the nations of that region. When we come down to 1981, that is the first time when India as a nation moved to the South Pole. Please note, we are talking, Arctic is the North Pole, we are talking about the South Pole now. India moved to the South Pole, which is Antarctic, and that is for the study of physical and environmental changes of the Earth. When that happened, with time, we were able to establish ourselves as one of the pioneers, one of the leaders as far as Arctic studies was concerned, and we were able to establish our research stations in the name of Dakshin Gangotri in 83, Maitri in 89, and Bharti in 2012. These were basically looking at scientific, strategic, political, and economic prospects such that India could gain from it. As these expeditions moved on, they were motivated mainly with an interest of ensuring that the counter-territorial claims on Antarctica by certain countries can be negated. Possible mineral explorations and commercializations of this region could be avoided, as is the charter in the Treaty of the Antarctic. The scientific researches of this area could be undertaken to understand what is the impact of climate change on these areas and how it is going to impact the entire monsoon culture of India. India is a country which depends largely on its monsoons for its growth and for its food. So definitely monsoons, change of monsoons has a direct impact on India's growth. And that is why that study is considered to be important. Overall, what it provided, this movement towards the South Pole, what it provided was access to international forums wherein we could speak up and we could make our point heard to the world community. And it allowed us to prove our dominance in faraway expeditions, which is something important if you have to be on the international map for people to consider you worth something. When you look at the Arctic began to kind of receive attention worldwide only as early as 2007, when the fourth International Polar Year was launched. This Polar Year was launched between 2007 to 2008, and it focused on studying the shrinking snow and ice cap in the polar region, its linkages between the linkages which exist between the two poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, and its impact on the rest of the Earth. Resilience of the local communities to environmental and social changes, studies of new and unknown frontiers of the poles. What was the area of interest for the international polar area. This allowed in 2007, our Indian scientists joined the IPY, and we were able to join the International Research Village in New Iceland at Spitsberg Island of Norway, of Sweden, sorry. And 2008, our research station Himadri was established at New Iceland. The focus of study of this research station was basically climate change and understanding the relationship between Arctic climate and the Indian monsoons. I'm repeating again, the major studies was climate change, and our interest was limited to only its impact, the impact of the poles on the monsoons, which was again one of the areas of interest in the Antarctic also for us. This involvement completely allowed Himadri, which was established in 2007. That helped us to become a full member of the New Iceland Science Managers Committee and deploy in 2014 a multi-sensor underwater mood laboratory observatory, which is called as the INDARC, and in 2016 the atmospheric laboratory, which allow us to monitor aerosols, black carbons, cloud precipitations, and humidity profiles, all related to climate change. INDARC, if you see, it's basically measuring physical and chemical properties at close temporal scales at various levels in the fjord, even during Arctic winters. What it allows us to understand is the kind of bathymetry and the kind of the physical and chemical parameters which change with changing temperatures and changing climates, and that again is an interest for studying the climate change for the entire world as such. If broadly I was to plot, 1920 we started off, 2007 we had the first expedition to the Arctic, 8 we established Himadri, 14 we deployed the INDARC, and 16 we established the atmospheric laboratory there. Quick look at where we are. This is where New Auckland is. If you look at it, this is where in New Auckland we are, and this is where Himadri is. And if you take a closer look, these are the research centers of various countries, of which this is Himadri as far as we are concerned. The INDARC again is located somewhere here where the red star is. It is basically an underwater sensor which is there for measuring the physical and chemical properties of the water. And the atmospheric laboratory, which I mentioned, is again at this location. This is the blow up of that region. And then you have the atmospheric measurement, and somebody is doing the measurement and physical terms where required. Now, all this boils down to our own interest, which is basically our interest towards climate change and its involvement with monsoons. Now, what it helped us at the end of it is that it allowed us to become an elected member to the Council of International Arctic Science Committee in 2012. We were granted the observer status of the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is basically a council of the nations which kind of survive there, or the nations which are hosted in that particular region. If you remember in the initial slide, I mentioned of 8 countries. They form the Arctic Council, but they are not the only people who are interested in the Arctic region. So that is why you have observers. There are close to about 13 observers which add on, out of which India is one of the observers. The involvement of the observers is that they can participate in the Arctic Council's working groups and engage with the Arctic Council members or the littorals of that particular area to ensure that their own interests are enhanced. That could be through MOUs, that could be through scientific collaborations and things like that. In the initial years, we had a limited involvement. There was a limited involvement of other nations, but with time, as time has gone by from 2007 to now, there is an increased involvement in this particular region. As a nation, India has preferred the status of limited involvement earlier, mainly because it aimed to look at climate change, like I mentioned, and studies to impact our monsoons. And it demonstrated its capability in scientific agenda setting to address research gaps, which was another kind of a goal which was being followed for the Antarctic also. What I wish to say is that while we move from Antarctic to Arctic, our interest in the towards these poles was consistent for quite some time, and we were only focusing towards climate studies, scientific studies with respect to climate change and its involvement with the monsoons, and to be a leader in terms of faraway explorations and make ourselves heard in the world community. Over the time, this involvement has increased. So let's look at our growing engagements in this region. Like I mentioned, for many years, we had little effort, or we made little effort to expand beyond this particular interest, limited interest in terms of climate change and monsoon related issues. But when we saw that there was an involvement of the other world nations in this particular region, we were forced to get involved in commercial activities, strategic activities, environmental and scientific activities as a nation. And that is why we rechristened our NCAOR, that is the National Center for Antarctic and Ocean Research, which was established in 2000, to the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research. Initially, it was only Antarctic. Please note the term, it had only Antarctic in it. It did not talk of Arctic. But in 2018, when the interest was kind of opened up, then the term Antarctic was changed to polar, which included both the poles, both Antarctic and Arctic. And that is how the world posturing was done, that yes, we are more interested. What our involvement has allowed us at the end is that we can now balance the two major powers of the world. One may say that Russia is no more a world power, but yes, it still carries its own weight. So keeping that in mind, to keep both these nations, both these powers in a balanced look, we look at US and the Indo-Pacific as an engagement, and Russia and the Indo-Arctic construct for the other engagement as far as Russia is concerned. For all this, we have kind of looked at scientific research cooperations. You remember I spoke of as a member of the Arctic Council or the observer of the Arctic Council. You can collaborate with the nations there. So we have the Norwegian program for research cooperation with India, which is the INDNOR, which was started in 2010. It looks at international political issues, environment and climate, clean energy and social developments. Then we have some scientific collaborations with Sweden, which was done in December 2019. And we have Polar Knowledge Canada. We have another scientific collaboration, which was established in February 2020. As far as Russia is concerned, we plan to create a maritime route from Chennai to Vladivostok. This will allow the movement of oil from their terminals easier, and it will be faster. Then we also plan to have partnerships with the Rosneft and Vostok for energy. These two are big names in Russia with respect to oil drilling in especially the Siberian region. And then we also have kind of signed a MOU with Russia to host an Indian Arctic research station in Siberia, which will allow us to kind of further our involvement with Russia and also be able to establish another research station up north. As far as business opportunities are concerned, Indian companies have begun investing in Arctic energy and terrestrial minerals. We have begun shipping LNG from Russia as early as 2018. ONG Videsh has brought 26% in Russia's Vankanov and 20% in Sakhalin 1 oil fields. There is a JV with Coal India and Vostok Coal Russia for India to mine coal in the Arctic. Remember, it is a very rich area with respect to minerals, and definitely all those, if we can gain from it, why not? On the military side, like always, Indian Navy has been used as a diplomatic tool to shape our furtherance of national interest. Till 1980, we were only looking at acquisition of new platforms from Russia, but subsequently, with time going, we have had refits being undertaken in Russia, and earlier, no Indian ships or submarines did not move in the Arctic Sea without the control of the Russian military as such in terms of passage. But now, over the time that has opened up, 2013, we have had the first Indian submarine to sail in the Arctic Sea, which is a milestone in its own self. In 2016, we had three Indian naval ships, Sayadri, Shakti, and Kitch, visiting Vladivostok. And in 2019, Turkish was the first ship which visited a number of Arctic states, which were St. Petersburg, Bergen in Norway, Karlskrona in Sweden, and Helsinki in Finland. This shows some kind of an involvement, some kind of a growing interest as far as the Arctic is concerned, as far as a nation is concerned, as far as India is concerned. Now let us look at the challenges which exist both for the region and for India in particular. So the first challenge as far as the Arctic region is concerned, if you remember, I mentioned that Arctic Treaty does not allow militarization. Same way, Arctic Treaty does not promote commercialization of the Antarctic. We are talking, sorry, the Antarctic Treaty does not allow commercialization of the Antarctic. But unfortunately, there is no similar treaty for the Arctic region because it is considered to be a area which has got claims of specific nations, those 8 nations that we spoke of. So nations have kind of preferred their own claims and they have given their own exclusive economic zone they have already marked. And one such effort of 2007 by Russia was during one of their expeditions, wherein they planted a titanium flag on the seabed to show that yes, they control that particular region. The second challenge is while Antarctic prohibits activities related to mineral resources or other than for scientific research, the Arctic can be exploited for minerals, and it has been being done so as early as the 18th century. Earlier by the local countries and the surrounding countries. Now the world has started moving in that region because it has been unexplored for many years because of the ice cap. The ice cap melting definitely open for exploitation. The third challenge is increased movement of commercial vessels. What it finally boils down is that you would have increased marine pollution and maritime terrorism. Terrorism in terms of piracy, in terms of damage to vessels and things like that, which definitely necessitates that some security mechanisms have to be created. Now, if you see that region, it is mainly controlled, a larger portion of it is controlled by Russia. Now, will Russia be the only one who will be playing the role of providing security? Maybe, maybe not. If you have your own interests in terms of maritime trade there, then you will have to have security mechanisms. You will have to have your own warships there. That is something which needs to be looked at because you are not the only player, or one nation is not the only player who would be using that route. You would have multiple nations using that particular route, and so you would have security mechanisms which would need to be involved and need to be put into place as and when that happens. Then overlapping planes, because of the closeness of the countries, automatically there is an overlapping EEZ claims. When that happens, definitely there is a certain amount of conflict. When conflict happens, definitely there is a challenge, sorry, and when the challenge happens, there is a conflict, and that conflict would invariably end up creating strengthening of military resources because then you have to kind of exercise that control. To exercise that control, you have to do that. Unfortunately, the Arctic Council has no provision for discussing military security and territorial claims because that is how they have kept their kind of charter, that they do not discuss military security and territorial claims. It's more of an economic kind of an arrangement, which is their economic and scientific area of concern, which is mainly studied. The fifth challenge is a growing interest of outside nations for resource and trade. You remember I mentioned that there were initially 8 countries who were participating. Then you had observer states coming in. Today, 13 of them happen to be there. When outside people are there, they look at their own interests. When they look at their own interests, definitely they are not interested in the local concerns of that particular region. So that kind of upsets the entire delicate balance of the region, which is kind of detrimental as far as a particular region is concerned in terms of safety, security, exploitation, and things like that. So that is another challenge that needs to be kept in mind. If we want to move to the challenges as far as India is concerned, the biggest challenge which India has been facing is lack of world posturing. We have been observer nation since 2013. while our official policy has been released as late as 2021. Now, if we have been observers in 2013 and if we do not have a policy, an official policy in the World Forum, definitely our interest kind of does not sound to be very serious and committed. So that is a kind of a challenge. Unfortunately, fortunately for us, that this policy is now in place, it at least gives a certain amount of message, and the world posturing has started to begin as far as this, or as far as the nation is concerned. The second area of concern is a lack of technical expertise to explore and exploit minerals in the Arctic. While we are a nation, a pioneer nation as far as the seabed mineral exploitation is concerned, we have even got ROVs and submersibles with us, but we do not have any scientific expertise which exists as far as conducting expeditions in polar conditions is concerned. One needs to understand that the ball game with respect to how the ocean behaves, how the resources change with respect to warm water conditions and in polar conditions is absolutely different. So while we have the technology and the expertise to handle warm water conditions, we lack, as of now, the technical expertise to address polar conditions. NCPOAR definitely is making some efforts, but then that is limited and the focus is kind of needed. The increased focus is kind of required in that particular area. Shallow pockets happens to be another area of concern. Many a times, many of the nations would kind of cooperate with you if you were to help them financially. Unfortunately, we do not believe in too much of grants as far as international connections are concerned. We look at more of providing soft skills and support systems to our friends or nations of common interest. So that kind of thing disallows access to resources and markets in the host nations, and it disallows creating a favorable alliance and relationship between these any two nations. Unlike countries like China, who by the power of money are able to kind of make inroads much faster and much easier, while we do make inroads, but we take a little longer time, mainly because of the fact that the need has to be understood and it is not a money game which plays on. So this all kind of boils down to where we stand is what are the shaping future trends for India. As on date, we are guided by two schools of thoughts as far as the Arctic is concerned. The first one is that the Arctic should be declared a region of global commons as the Antarctic has been done. But unfortunately, the world feels differently. They feel that it is an area which is available for exploitation and the first ones to come there can do the need. The second is, which is driven by the world, is the push ahead to achieve its interest in the engaging with Arctic nations. Now, which school should we follow is something difficult to understand and comment upon at any stage, but then these two schools of thoughts do remain. As far as the Ministry of External Affairs of India is concerned, India's interests have been indicated as a scientific, environmental, economic, and strategic areas. For the present, India seems to be following a middle path as far as these two schools of thoughts is concerned, based on the interests which have been indicated by the Ministry of External Affairs. We aim to look at forging relationships in science and environment and to meet its growing demands for resources and definitely our scientific research as we have been doing. Based on all this, the 2021 document of the India's Arctic policy gives you some idea about where we need to move to or what is our area of interest. The first one is to enhance India's cooperation with the Arctic region, to harmonize the polar research with the third pole, which is the Himalayas. The temperatures and the temperature ranges in Himalayas is the same as that in the poles. So it is kind of believed that the communities that stay in the Himalayas and those that stay in the poles would have common problems. And at the social level, we can connect up and we can create some kind of a research with respect to the understanding of these communities is concerned. We have a common linkage in that fashion. Then to contribute to efforts to enhance humankind's understanding of the Arctic region per se, to strengthen international efforts on combating climate change and protection of the environment, which has always been our core interest, whether it is the Arctic or the Antarctic. and to advance the study and understanding of the Arctic within the country, because a very little information is available as far as the Arctic is concerned. With time, Antarctica has still gained some prominence, but Arctic still remains kind of out of the focus of the common man in India or the major population of India. So that is another area wherein this interest can be developed. So there are 6 pillars on which this entire thought process is kind of focused on. One is the science and research. Second is the climate and environmental protection. Third is the economic and human development. Fourth, transportation and connectivity. Fifth, governance and international cooperation. And the sixth is the national capacity building. This policy, that is the India's Arctic policy, is considered to be timely. It's likely to provide a direction to the India's policymakers on contours of India's engagement with the region. Please understand that when you have a common policy, it allows the various agencies within the system to kind of focus their energy and their resources towards the right direction, which is what is the intention of this Arctic policy. The first step towards developing it is, in fact, one of the first steps to developing a whole of government approach, wherein each department is not working independently, but are working towards a common goal because there is a defined policy in place. And it is likely to raise awareness about Arctic within India and abroad through programs, seminars, and events. Now, while we have seen the challenges and where we stand as far as India is concerned, we need to look at what possibly can be done to improve where we are and move ahead towards a positive side. The first and foremost that one can think of is to establish a desk at MEA which looks dedicatedly at Arctic affairs. There are 13 observer nations as on date as in that particular region, along with the 8 nations which are the Arctic Council. If we do have a dedicated desk of MEA, the efforts involving these 13 nations can be kind of consolidated. It can be looked at holistically. Today, it may be looked at differently because there are 13 nations handled by different desks. But when it comes down to a particular area, that is the Arctic, it needs to be looked at holistically as a single thing. And that is why you need to have a desk in MEA, and you need to appoint an Arctic ambassador or a representative who will voice India's perspective on the Arctic affairs. Next is constituting a dedicated expert committee to plan, monitor, steer, implement, and review the India's Arctic policy, which is being published. While the policy has been put into place, now we need to synergize the effort of the various systems, both private and governmental agencies, such that we are able to move to a common goal and we are not kind of moving in silos and we are not creating problems for each other. Last but not the least, in terms of the basic recommendation would be to include the Arctic in the Indian maritime security strategy. We had a talk recently with respect to the Indian maritime security strategy. Unfortunately, the Arctic does not play a major role as far as that particular region is concerned. It is looked at only as a secondary area of interest. But if we are to focus on it, definitely the whole of India approach should include the maritime security strategy also. We need to look at how our men and material in the Arctic, as and when they reach, would be protected and how they can be looked after when it finally happens. Because finally, at the end of it, if something goes wrong at sea for our people there, definitely the Indian Navy would be involved, and that is where the maritime strategy would come into play. So if it is not part of it, definitely the support systems, the focus area would not be there, and the kind of thrust towards developing resources would not be there. The second set of recommendations I would say is in terms of monetary and technical support. We need to create some systems for that infrastructure development as far as that area is concerned. We also need to encourage collaborative studies with indigenous communities. We spoke of Himalayas and the poles being of kind of common linkage. We need to create those kind of collaborative studies. There are some already in place, but they need to be enhanced for greater gains. Then we need to encourage education about the polar region at various levels in the academic institutions within the country. It could be only within our country, or it could be collaboration with the universities of the Arctic Council nations, such that we will be able to move our researchers up and down. Furthermore, we need to educate our bureaucrats, policymakers, and thinkers on topics associated with the Arctic, because the more we kind of disseminate information, the more we are able to understand the area, the more would be our approach, the better would be our approach towards that entire effort. So all this is required in terms of educating people. We need to establish some research stations in the Arctic, like what we have done in the Antarctic as part of the satellite data receiving Earth station. If we were able to do that in Arctic also, we will be able to cover the we will get better information in terms of data receiving as far as from the satellites is concerned. Then we need to collaborate with the Arctic nations in terms of for greater collaborations due to the proximity to the North Pole. Then that is with Canada and Denmark because of its proximity to the North Pole. Finland due to common interest in scientific research. Sweden, being a NATO member, will help reduce its own regional tensions. And we need to conduct naval exercises with the navies of the Arctic nations so that we as a navy are able to understand that area much better, and they are able to understand the way we operate so that there is greater collaboration and cooperation as and when it is required in terms of the long-term gains. In terms of fellowships, we need to address some challenges as an observer. Like I mentioned, observer can create relationships with the particular nation or the Arctic region. If we were to have fellowships, we will be able to create some issues, we will be able to create some study areas, and we will be able to gain positively from that. That could be done under the aegis of Niti Aayog if required. The INSTC, which is the International North-South Transport Corridor, presently is still St. Petersburg. Possibly we could extend it to the Nordic and the Baltic nations such that we are able to connect up with them and trade, whether it is land-based or maritime, is definitely a very big connector between two nations. Our involvement in the Arctic Council also should increase. Presently, we have very limited involvement. We should learn from South Korea to encourage researchers to participate in these arrangements such that our involvement, our presence is shown more, and we will be able to gain better. Like I mentioned of the IMSS, same thing goes with respect to our defense strategies. Today, our concerns or our thinking process with respect to defense strategy in the maritime domain is that we need to be controlling these flocks, that is the sea lines of communication and supply lines for the adversary. But once NSR opens, then you would have that route open for supply lines, for trade, etc. So we as a nation need to rethink what are we going to do, how our defense strategy in terms of the maritime domain is concerned will need a change, especially when the NSR will be open. So that also needs to be looked at as time goes by. Our activities needs to be extended to the Arctic. Presently, it is only a policy which focuses towards the ASEAN states and to some part in terms of East Asia, and it can be extended beyond to the Arctic. That is another area of way ahead for us. And we need to create trading relationships with the Arctic, Nordic, Baltic nations to bring these nations together. That, like I mentioned, it is a very important area to bring two nations together, trade. So if you have trade, definitely you have better movement of people and men and material, which brings two nations closer to each other. Finally, concluding, I would mention is that the interest of nations is growing in the Arctic due to the global warming. The traffic in the North South Road will continue to grow. It will be development triggered by both commercial and non-commercial concerns, and what India needs to ensure its relevance in this region in terms of scientific research and trade. Thank you very much for the patient hearing.